back in the day, I remember City constantly doing, taking off a De Jong, or to bring on a De Jong, pushing Agueroooo even further up.
It was Lucky Aya, that's what we do, yeah.
Or even in this instance, bring on Balotelli, which, when you think about how chaotic the match was, introducing oil to the fire on top of that in Balotelli.
That's beautifully put,
yeah,
by the way.
maybe it feels at the moment like, I'm gonna hold on to that, by the way. Barton telling me I'm putting it beautifully put. That's a good moment. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Rematch. It's your host, Lias Bouzidi, and today, I have a very interesting episode. As you guys know, I make no secret about the club I support, and today, I feel like the producers of Rematch have almost invited me into my own personal hell. I am reliving personal trauma with a fan of the team that were the protagonists on the day, and the voice of, again, my own personal trauma. I am joined today, yet again, by Stephen McInerney. Thank you so much for being here with me.
My pleasure, mate. Massive pleasure.
Yeah, I'm sure it's massive. And the voice of football. Thank you so much, Martin Tyler, for being with us today. It's an absolute honor. No matter the circumstance, I wish it could be in better circumstances, but for you to join us today.
Yeah, I do get a fair amount of reaction to that game, even these days. But there are two reactions. One come from Manchester City fans, general football fans who enjoyed the moment, and the others come from people like yourself who go, "You've ruined my life." So I hope I haven't ruined yours too much. But, well, winners and losers, what it's all about, isn't it?
Yeah.
You'll wake up tonight hearing it, won't you?
I'm literally going to be in a cold, pale sweat after this episode is done. Manchester City 3, QPR 2, the final day of the 2011-12 season, and a day that is still remembered in English football today due to the ending. But if we kind of talk about the build-up to this game, the context of this season, this was a Manchester United side who had just come off winning the Premier League in 2010-11, and a Manchester City side who were building the previous season, had won that FA Cup final in the semi-final. They beat United, and it felt like the two were almost coming towards a crash course, United and City. And it really kicked off in that 6-1 defeat at Old Trafford at the start of the year, where I think it almost put the entire world on alert that City were no longer the noisy neighbor. They were no longer the side that were creeping into it. They were here to compete. However, the season almost ended up looking like United were still going to win the league, because with 6 games left in the year, United found themselves 8 points ahead of City. But all of a sudden, United started slipping up, losing to Wigan, drawing to Everton 4-4 at home, and City just seemed to continue building up steam until the third last game of the season. The two sides met yet again at the Etihad, and Vincent Kompany's header giving City a huge lead that eventually put them at the top of the table, where they would no longer look back. But then we get into that last game of the year. City at home to QPR, United away to Sunderland. Stephen, did this almost feel like a formality to you, or did you feel like there could be potentially one last twist of the story?
No, it's probably easy sitting here now in hindsight saying it did, but it didn't. Like we were chatting beforehand about the mentality of City fans. I've called typical City, where we presume the worst case scenario at all times, because that's what I was raised on. I was spoon-fed it from being a child. And I expected, look, I felt City were going to win logically. We were the better side. We were in a great run of form. You know, it felt like the stars were aligning. And we dispelled some of the demons in the previous season, beating United on the way to win the FA Cup. That was a line in the sand moment for City, because United, they were the bullies to us. They were the team that gave me so much trauma as a child watching United win. And we dispelled some of that fear. And of course, we'd had the 6-1 as well, where it felt like the power, the hands of power were shifting in Manchester, and it was very much becoming ours for the taking. But going into that game, there's always the fear, especially given that QPR were fighting relegation, and you had all the narrative around it. Mark Hughes, the ousted manager, in every position on the pitch, they had they had Sean Wright Phillips, they had Joey Barton, they had Nader Manua.
Yeah.
There was all these narratives, and I love a narrative, but I'm terrified of it. I'm sure Martin loves a narrative, but to me as a City fan, I was like, oh, he's going to score. He's going to beat us to avenge his sacking. We're going to mess up, and United are going to turn it around despite beating him 3 games earlier in the derby. Your head can't help but go to all these places as a football fan, because, ultimately that's what makes it so addictive. We obsess over these stories and these feelings, but without all that, though, it isn't as special. Without all that narrative that builds into it. And look, we talked about the context then of just the season. For me, there was 20 odd years of story before it. I could go back to when City were at the lowest ebb, and we won the playoff final we were. It was glorious. We got Terry Cook on loan for United, and that fired us into back into the old Division 1. Days later, United win a treble. So that was where the clubs were at. So it felt like every time we did something, we'd either be quashed or we'd be reminded of where we were in the food chain at that point. So all that for me, and as a boy growing up in South Manchester, surrounded by United fans, it all bled into that day. The feeling wasn't just of that season; it was a lifetime of supporting Manchester City and struggling. We beat them in derbies every now and then, but we were just a noisy neighbours at that point. You remove all the past history, and you take away so much of what made that game special. Like for me, there was absolutely a fear that it could go wrong because it meant so much to the city of Manchester, and there was a feigned indifference about what City meant to a lot of United fans back then, but it was real because I lived it and experienced it, and that game was laced with tension and potential stories everywhere you looked, and what made it so special.
Martin, you've obviously commented so many different title races, a few final days where there were little twists and turns, but heading into this one, again, with City just having to beat a QPR side, fighting for relegation, and United against Sunderland, was there any part of you that actually felt on the day there could be one final twist, or that this could go against the grain and United would end up winning?
Well, Stephen just mentioned the phrase typical City. I actually used those two words in a pre-match interview I did for Sky Sports News on the morning of the game, that really that was the one thing that from the neutral point of view you looked at and thought, well, City have blown a few things. One thing Stephen didn't mention was the Community Shield, where City were 2-0 up at half-time and they came out for the second half almost jumping on each other's backs, larking around a bit, and obviously got beaten. So the feeling had been, in fact, the Manchester derby, because I go pre-Premier League. There was football pre-Premier League, everybody, just to remind you. And the Manchester derbies were very low-key, really. I didn't do the Main Road Massacre. I didn't do that one. I think Clive Tilsey did that. But I'd done a lot of games where really City were just making up the numbers, This was the new City. This is the City that had won the FA Cup. This was the City that were looking as though they got the resources to compete. And they were supposed to win. The only thing I can think about that made me believe that it was going to be the result that happened, but not the way it happened, was that I did a lot of work with the help of people at Manchester City like Simon Heggie about the names of the players' children. Because on the presentation lap, the kids all come on and who's got, I'm also making sure there were no lines that I crossed in looking at the families. And I had all that. And during the game, and I know we're getting ahead of ourselves here, but a good friend of mine, an excellent commentator, Rob Hawthorne, was doing the United game. And I was thinking, gosh, Rob, you're going to have all this. I hope you know the kids probably wouldn't be at Sunderland, but I hope you've got something. And being Rob, I'm sure he did have. I never asked him actually what he was prepared for, a trophy lift and all that would go with it. It was supposed to happen, but not the way it happened.
I find it so interesting how Stephen has all these nerves, because from my perspective as a United fan, and I was only 14 at the time, but I remember to this day where I was, what day it was. It was actually Mother's Day in the US at that point as well too, because I remember going to brunch after with a very disgruntled father. But I remember going into that game feeling so dejected, honestly, thinking...
Rightfully so. We were on the run. But,
and you know what it was? After that United game that we lost at the Etihad, I think certain people forget that there was a game between United and the final day, and that was City going away to Newcastle, who had a fantastic year that year. They finished 5th under Pardew. And that was maybe the last bit of hope that I had that maybe City might slip up. And it felt that way, right? At halftime, it was 0-0, and then Yaya Toure changed the game.
Yeah, it was 2 late goals.
And after that game, I lost all hope. I thought, QPR, there's no chance.
Yeah, but City won the league in 1968 at Newcastle.
A bit before my time, but
they won 4-3, and United were coming second in that particular race as well. So being a lot older than you two and everybody in the room here, I thought the Newcastle game, I keep coming up with these things that happened decades ago, and nobody in my current production sphere when I'm working on television has any interest in it whatsoever. And I'll find an old player. I saw Cliff Jones, the tribute to Martin Chivers, before the cup tie against Villa. They had Glenn Hoddle was there. Cliff Jones, they played in the double winning team in 1961, and I recognised him before some of the more current people. So memory has a mixed value when you're broadcasting my age. But I do think, that was a lucky ground for them then, and they won the league. And Yaya Toure stepped up, didn't he? And
massively.
I had a great commentator with me at Narquin, obviously,
Great player.
Legend,
a great man, and always a pleasure to see him. I don't think he gets any credit like he should do. And the other person who should get credit, I have to mention, is the match director, Tony Mills, who did a most fantastic job, because without the pictures that match, and the words are words, but pictures are what we watch. Television, it's television, isn't it? The cameramen were amazing for Sky, and Tony had a really slick team. So I was just putting the cherry on the icing on the cake. The cake was built by these people, and have Niall as well, who recognised obviously what it meant, and also had the intellectual perception to recognise how ridiculously the storyline was. How on earth could this happen? How on earth are we talking about? They should be walking. I mean, to be fair to the Premier League, they had another trophy at Sunderland, so they were covering all eventuality. And I just wondered what it was like for those people who were there to put the plinth on and get all the medals ready. They'd given up.
Yeah.
I mean, they were probably thinking, "Can I get an early train home?" And all that happened. But we're again, I don't want to get ahead of it. You tell the story.
No, 100%. I mean, let's start with the Pablo Zabaleta goal, right? Because although it was a nervy start to the game for City, naturally so, given the occasion, Manchester City do find themselves 1-0 ahead. And it's probably the unlikeliest of scorers, because when you see Aguero on the pitch, you see Tevez, you see Yaya Toure, David Silva. I mean, the names just roll off the tongue. Zabaleta's hardly the first person you would think, but maybe fitting as well, too, due to the fact that he was one of the original members of this squad.
He was a warrior, too, and a great guy. And he would know that somebody needed to step up. He always valued his goals. It was great to talk about the games afterwards, and there had been the odd reunion where I've been lucky enough to be invited, though I really feel that it's inappropriate. But we end up talking football generally, and he's a real thinker about the game.
Yeah,
he's got a lot more to offer football.
A manager, I think he's assistant manager now
with
for
Silvino.
Silvino. Is it Georgia that they're the manager of? Or Albania, one of the two?
It's Albania.
Yeah, Albania. So congrats.
But that was his first Premier League goal of the season that year. People don't realise. So you think about choosing your moments. And Zabaleta was an immediate hero of mine when he signed. I remember when he signed from Espanyol, and it was just pre-takeover. And I wasn't a name on the shirt kind of person ever, but there's something about Zabaleta that I fell in love with immediately, and I've got the shirt still with his name on the back. And he was, an immediate hero of mine, because I think if you're a reasonably limited footballer, which obviously most of us who don't play a game are, you look at someone like Zabaleta, obviously talented, he's achieved so much, but he was a man whose dedication and commitment and aggression, you wanted to be that. You wanted to be the guy that everyone respected, a footballer's footballer, because of his commitment and determination. And he's got the iconic photos of him wearing a bandage from pre-seasons with blood pouring out, he'd been a warrior, and then to score when we needed it, his first Premier League goal of the season. It wasn't a great goal.
Very good quiz question. Which Argentinian scored the first goal on the day Man City won the title? I think a lot of people would get that wrong.
There's two slightly better players on the pitch than Tevez, I think, there. But it was brilliant. It was I think it was quite fitting as well that he had that moment, because there's legends and then there's sort of like cult heroes as well, which are slightly different definition. He bleeds the line between the two, but he had that moment. He deserved an individual moment. Defenders don't usually get a moment, and that was his, and we nearly spoiled it for him, I'll be honest with you, but I'm so glad that he was involved in that, because he deserved it. He was his contribution was one for the defenders that the season was built on. I mean, I remember, again, I'm watching the United game, but I have the City game on at the same time, and I'm just occasionally glancing over. They're still in the game. And then you're getting to halftime. I think for me, I was taking it 10 minutes at a time. Okay, they're nearly at halftime. Just get to halftime 0-0 and maybe we can do something here. That Zabaleta goal and the way he scored it as well too. I mean, I just looked at him like, of all goals to score, Paddy Kenny, please just do a little bit better there. And in that moment, I think even the 1% of hope I had just completely dissipated. But going into halftime now, 1-0 up for City. Is that confidence maybe there now, Stephen? Because you said at the start of the game, you had the natural doubt. Are you just that little bit more comfortable going in 1-0 now? Obviously, you win at that point. The feeling is you're feeling confident. You feel like you're going to win. You don't know. One goal is not enough. Once again, they were still fighting relegation at this point, and you presume with all the ex-players on the pitch and so on, and City's incredible ability to shoot themselves in the foot, that at any point it could go wrong. And it was a nervy game. It wasn't City at their free-flowing best. City played great football that season. We did some wonderful things. we had some decent half chances in that first half, but the goal itself wasn't a particularly enthralling one. It was a sloppy goal,
scrappy goal.
Yeah,
it looped in the air, and it just felt like it took an eternity to come down.
Yeah, Yaya Toure with the assist. Of course, he was influential, but it wasn't much of a goal, and it is a goal that probably encapsulated the feeling of the game.
It could have won you the league, though, couldn't it?
It could have won the league, yeah. But
take them any way they come.
Yeah.
But yeah, the feeling was, it's a long time ago now, which is wild to say this, but what I recall was feeling like, well, this is a good start, if that makes sense. Not necessarily the complete picture, because going into a game of that magnitude, the first half feels reasonably short. The second half feels 5 times as long always, because you have to play then the emotion of the game. You don't just play the team, you play the occasion as well. And that 45 is intensely more dramatic than the first 45, because that's where you hopefully, you seal the deal. And I had a feeling that at that point, like, there was so much more left in the story. And I'm not just saying that in hindsight, but you felt it as a City fan. Didn't know it'd be that dramatic, but yeah.
I think the other factor we haven't mentioned, of course, Mark Hughes, the Manchester United legend, not just the ex-Manchester City manager. So there was all sorts of incidents. Mark was very kind to me the night before the game. As commentators, we obviously try and get as close to the information that we're going to have to work with the next day. And I went to see him at the hotel, and some of the players were around, and he said, we're going to have a real go at it. And you probably think, they'll sit back and try and nick it. But they did have a go, and they picked quite an attacking team. And I do think that obviously being a goal down at half-time, then you've got to have a go plus, haven't you then? And that's what they did. But he was very relaxed the night before the game. I still feel that now, that we were sort of feeling the tension, not as broadcasters, but football tension,
Naturally.
You're thrown into the middle of all this, and winning and losing very rarely matters. As a commentator, you want to do a good job. You want to serve your masters. The television producers are kind enough. Whoever sent me to that game did me an enormous. Well, I know it was a guy called Vic Wakeling, who's sadly no longer with us. And we don't pick our games as commentators. You get an email and saying that's where you're going, and last day of the season you'll do that one. And Rob went to the Stadium of Light. So try to get as close to it as you can. And I was surprised that I got as close as I did to the Queen's Park Rangers, and of course it was very valuable come the second half.
Of course, and only 3 minutes into the second half, I think the entire stadium is silenced as Djibril Cisse, who had a really nice spell at QPR, coming in I think halfway through the season. I think he had a huge part to play in them staying up. But you talk about that moment, the misjudgment of the header from Julian Lescott, and then Djibril Cisse, a fantastic finish as well too, past Joe Hart. I mean, you talk about a silencer, a goal that just shocks an entire stadium. Djibril Cisse, how about that?
Well, he was a very good player. He was obviously a bit of an up and down career, and consistency might have been something that he lacked, but ability wasn't. And that he was playing, we sort of thought he would play, but you never know. Again, thinking that there might be an extra defender in there to try and sort of squeeze out a result, really, which would have been great for QPR, and the consequence of Manchester City. Well, that's their problem. Yeah, he'd scored some big goals on Sky before, so it wasn't a problem on these days, really. As a broadcaster, you just want to make sure you don't slip up, really. And it was very clear that it was his goal. It was a much tidier goal than the Zabaleta's. And of course, then, saying the mood's changing. Everybody's now thinking about what's happening. Man United were getting on with their business up in the northeast. And then we realised there were 2 stories here, and which way was the dice going to roll?
3 even, because QPR needed to stay up on the day, and Bolton are playing, I think, at Spurs at that point. So there's so many different.
Playing Stoke.
Was it Stoke? Yeah. I think it was Birmingham. Okay. There were so many different.
And Mark Hughes had somebody there, and so they were getting messages to the dugout as to what it was going, and it was going okay for City, but of course you never know, do you? And I've called the Premier League virtually from the start the League of Late Goals, been even more emphasised in the last few years, and of course we had the ultimate late goals. It was the 20th season of the Premier League, which I think is a nice part of it as well.
Yeah, of course.
It's sort of the last day of the 20th season of a league that started shrouded in controversy. How was it going to fit into our structure of the Football League? We've been built on that, and so this was a massive movement commercially, really. and was clearly worked. And at the end of the game, I saw Richard Scudamore. The deals for the next season hadn't been done. Richard Scudamore was chief executive of the Premier League. I've never seen such a wide smile. It was about as wide as the stadium because he just
show me the
money. So it was sort of. I think I like that symbolism as well. The 20th, virtually the last kick of the ball. Maybe somewhere else had not quite finished. I've never checked that out, but certainly the last kick of the ball in a meaningful way.
Naturally,
and it wrapped it up nicely.
Yeah. Djibril Cisse's goal, though, does that almost just reaffirm that it's going to happen to us again?
Absolutely, and it was the manner of the goal as well. It was sloppy, Lescott had been fantastic all season. I mean, Pep was talking recently about how you don't know how good a player is going to be until you look in their eyes at stadiums like the Bernabeu or big games and so on. And I mean this with the greatest respect to Lescott, but he wasn't quite a Vincent Kompany or something like that. A really good player, and he'd been formative for that City defence. But I think that was one of the biggest games of his life, probably the biggest game of his career at that point. And he flapped at that, unfortunately. And I've worked with him since then. He's a top player. He was great. And I actually think he got a harsh end of the stick from Mancini, who moved on from him the season after. He brought in Nastasic, and I think he'd never forgave him for that, if I'm being honest with you. But I thought Lescott was a fantastic player, but he just misread it entirely.
Yeah. I was on a podcast with him quite recently, October. And of course, we were talking about the game, and I remembered that we were talking about what happened. Where were you, like Julian? Where were you when the final whistle went? What was the picture? What was going through your eyesight? Which is fascinating to talk to the players about that. Who did they see? What was who reacted to, and everything. And we went into that, and he was lovely on it. And of course, then he sort of put that asterisk against it, saying, of course, I'd had this moment in the game, and I'd being truthful. I'd rather put that to one side. I hadn't even thought about it. Yeah. So he's really,
I'm sure it's just relief for him in that moment, right?
Yeah, but I mean, to win the league, to win any league, that is the ultimate in football. And
right.
Cups are great, and we love the finals and the big drama of the presentation. The league, anybody who's been involved with football, you want to be a league champion. And that's what City just got.
Yeah. 1-1. We look at another twist in the story. There's so many turns. Joey Barton, the red card. What on earth is going through? I mean, I think we ask that quite often, but in that moment in particular, what on earth is going through his mind?
Yeah, it's shrouded by that question with Joey Barton, really, isn't it? He just lost his head. I think that's the emotion, of the game, the occasion, getting to him. I wouldn't be surprised if a small part of Joey Barton with his ego, and probably felt he should have been on been there for City. It was his former club and so on. And I think he just couldn't really handle the occasion. And you could see afterwards, it was more the reaction after the red card as well. Obviously, Tevez was a wily player. He definitely got in his head and incited him. Of course he did, and you would do, but it's Tevez knew how to get on people's skins, and there's not many people probably worse to react than Joey Barton. It was afterwards as well when you saw he lost his head entirely and he hit out Aguero and
Kompany as well too.
Yeah, he just had an utter head loss. But I mean, that was Joey Barton at Manchester City and throughout his entire career, and he's carried on off the pitch as well. And unfortunately, he's not the kind of player. It's weird because paradoxically, he's incredibly dedicated and hard-working football, and he was actually pretty decent as well for City when at one point when we were nowhere near the side that we were. Yeah, he did. He was a good player at his best, but his issue was always, he crossed the line, and that's what people like him do in games like that. They can't control their emotions, and I could only imagine the feeling as a QPR player. You'd been furious.
He was the captain as well too.
Yeah, exactly. He let his entire teammates down there. At this point, 1-1.
Came out of nothing as well.
The game
wasn't like that at all. And suddenly, but I just put some context on it from much more recent time, playing against 10 men. Manchester United had 75 minutes recently at home to Everton and didn't score at all. So I don't want people to devalue the excitement of what we're talking about now because they were playing against 10 men. I think it's still very hard to do that. But of course, QPR had more to offer with 10 men than perhaps as Everton did in the game.
Remind you, that was the worst day of your life so far. It could be much worse.
We're good.
Are we going to do? I commentated on that actually with Jay Bothroyd, who of course played in the game that we're talking about as well. So
I'm really enjoying this, by the way, guys.
It's great fun.
I remember watching that Joey Barton incident again from my own perspective, just so angry because that Djibril Cisse moment was like, oh, hello, hold on, we might still have a chance here. When Joey Barton lashes out the way he does, and like you said, completely out of nothing, I'm just thinking, has this guy just done us over for no reason whatsoever? But then again, another twist in the story, Jamie Mackie. gives QPR the most surprising of leads. The header was fantastic, by the way. The header was, I think a lot of people forget how quality of a goal that goal was from JB Mackie. But
I thought it was a wonderful goal, and one Manchester City fan, and I bow to your knowledge here. I was accused once upon a time by a Manchester City fan that I shouted too loud on Jamie Mackie's goal. It was one fan, and if he's watching this, I forgive you for that, but it was a great goal, and of course it was an amazing story. Yeah. So if I hadn't done that, I don't think I'd have been doing my job, really.
Of course.
And Jamie, he had a career of moments, really, and that was probably the highest moment that he got to, though he didn't win the game, but it was an extraordinary twist to the story as it happened.
And like you correctly pointed out, right, they actually got better when they went down to 10 men.
Well, you can do that. I mean, I don't want to keep treading on your corns here, but Everton...
I'm already down, don't worry.
But Everton found it. It was that was 75 minutes, and they scored, and they won the game. So it is one of the cliches. It's sometimes hard to play against 10 men, against 11. 10 dig in. They know everyone's got to be on their game. They're all bind together, and often it's because of a sense of injustice. But I don't think there was any sense of injustice in the case of Joey Barton. They probably went, it's Joey, isn't it? So we get on with it, and they certainly got on with it. Yeah, it was a terrific goal, and at that point, that's when everybody would be thinking, well, it's all going to happen. Man United probably ahead by then, were they?
We were ahead. And the roar at the Stadium of Light when we found out that QPR had just gone up 2-1. I remember watching the game, and all of a sudden it's like, even the commentator, Rob Hawthorne, and United have just learned that City have got... I couldn't believe it. I was saying, there is no way this crazy season is actually going to end up in us winning a trophy at the end of it.
The mad thing is, as a City fan, it didn't surprise me. It didn't. Everything I was talking about before the game was visibly happening in front of us in the most dramatic fashion. For it to be Joey Barton getting sent off, and then I think it was even Vincent Kompany was probably skinned out wide, I think, as well, our captain, and didn't get back and stop the cross. And it was a catalogue of manic moments. To concede the first goal so sloppily, Barton to get sent off, and then to go behind with United leading. It was just the whole thing, the sinking feeling.
You start to think United always win, so you're thinking, well, this is going to happen. They'll be a bit lucky here because of an amazing response to going down 10 men for a team that's fighting to stay in the division, but they are fighting to stay in the division. And that I can't remember what I was saying. The only thing I do remember is thinking, I hope Rob's prepared for the trophy lift. That's all I kept thinking, and knowing, not worrying about it, knowing what a top pro he is, that he would have been, and that really my day is going to finish without a trophy lift, and that we were all primed to go to a restaurant afterwards. It was our last league game, obviously everybody's last league game of the season, and that the restaurant, we'd be there a bit earlier than otherwise planned. And Graham Souness had done the arrangements, and he was absolutely spot on with all these things, and knowing his food and his wine, that I'm sure we'd be welcome at whatever time we got there. So an hour or two early, well, we'd be fed.
I was watching the game back just to remind myself on the taxi away here, and you see the cuts to the City fans in the stadium and so on, and share their feelings entirely. But you see the look on the face of utterly despondent. There's one lad in tears, and you see the sheer horror on the face of these City fans is because it's their worst fears unravelling. To beat United, 2 games earlier, to come back from 8 points behind with 6 games left, to be on the cusp of greatness, and then to potentially give it away, is like that was our biggest nightmare essentially. With all the former players for QPR, there's just too many angles to it, and that look when you look at the City fans' faces, that is genuine. Oh, we've messed it up here. I'm sure a lot of them would be like, loads more time left. A lot of them didn't believe it. I know, because I felt it. I felt at that moment, a few drinks down, admittedly, so I was definitely not in the most emotionally secure state, but I definitely felt we'd messed it up here. I could feel it, because it was just an absurd reality to be unfolding in front of you, to be down to a relegation threatened side against 10 men with a former City player sent off. Just too many boxes being ticked for an incredible story here.
I think a lot of newer fans who have maybe been introduced to the sport the last 5 or 6 or even 10 years, who have grown up on City's dominance and also grown up on United's disarray, are probably having a hard time conceptualizing what we're talking about here. But I think you really have to cast your mind back to where both clubs were in the food chain at this point. Man United always won. They always
won
found
12
a way.
Premier League titles at that time. Yeah, the 13th was the year after.
They'd won 4 in 5 years.
Yeah. and Sir Alex, having threatened to retire, had come back stronger and more determined to keep on top of it. And City were, the investment was there, but we've seen other teams invest,
of course,
and it hasn't always worked. But they really were on the cusp, I think. Had it gone against them that day, goodness knows what we'd be talking about now. It would have been a real punch in the solar plexus for them. It would have taken a lot of getting over. We're just talking here on the back of Crystal Palace having won the FA Cup, getting knocked out by a team not in the top non-league level, the second non-league level, and that takes so much away. That would have had that sort of taking it away from winning the cup the year before, and because United would have benefited from it. So it was. I do understand, and obviously I've done a lot of football commentary since all this happened, but I do understand why we get asked about it a lot, because I swear you'll never see anything like it again. Yeah. And I believe that, and it's got a place that will live on beyond all of us. I think it'll never be forgotten. Yeah.
The thing is, the context of the game as well is everyone looks at what City are now. There's a lot of cynicism around City these days with the investment, the money, and so on, all the noise. I get it as a City fan, I understand it. But City weren't that club right then. If anything, there was a sort of curiosity where City were coming from. There wasn't this, in general, dislike or disdain of Manchester City. We had money, but people weren't bothered about spending it back then. If anything, there was a sort of fascination to see United knock down a peg or two. There wasn't. So, in fact, a lot of neutrals were sort of fascinated by the idea of City winning.
Everybody tells me they were supporting City at the
they were, and like that was City weren't really seen as these cash-rich sides that everyone sort of wanted to knock down like they do now, and so it was a game of, we were sort of seen as the underdogs, which feels wild to say now in 2026, but back then it was true. People wanted to knock down the giants of United, and we were piffily dismissed as Ferguson as the noisy neighbours and all this kind of stuff. We had the Tevez link as well. Mancini and Ferguson have been
what a rivalry.
Yeah, they hate each other. It was great fun to watch. Too much politeness in football these days, I would argue. Give me that. Give me managers tussling on the sidelines again. And of course, it's in Balotelli, wrestling with Ferdinand, in Wembley. All that bled into it as well. So there was a brewing hatred between the two collectives, not just the teams, not just the clubs, but between the sets of players as well, after the 6-1 as well. So
the gap between the two clubs was much faster than we think about it now, because obviously where City have come from since. But it was starting to turn, and that's why it's so dramatic, because had it gone the other way, I remember one of the angriest managers I ever saw was Arsene Wenger after they lost the semi-final to United, the semi-final replay, when Bergkamp missed a penalty and Ryan Giggs scored the last ever goal in an FA Cup semi-final replay to absolutely rubber-stamped his place in FA Cup history. And Wenger thought, I've done more than lose a game here. I've lost the grip that I had on the rivalry. And I think City would have gone back a long way. I know United won the league the next year, but had that gone wrong, that would have been, you've got it in the palm of your hand, and somehow you've thrown it away.
Let's talk after the Mackie goal, because that is a big moment right there where it could very easily just go sour for City. But I think they deserve a lot of credit in this instance to continue pushing. And Mancini throws on another attacker, which is something that back in the day I remember City constantly doing, taking off a De Jong, or to bring on De Jong, pushing Yaya Toure even further up.
That's what we do,
Or even in this instance, bring on Balotelli, which, when you think about how chaotic the match was, introducing oil to the fire on top of that in Balotelli.
That's beautifully put,
yeah, by the way. Maybe feels at the moment like, I'm gonna hold on to that, by the way. Martin telling me I'm putting it beautifully put. That's a good moment. But bring on Balotelli in that moment, alongside Dzeko and alongside Aguero, and just throwing numbers and going for it. City are in desperation mode. So when that Edin Džeko equalizer comes in, not much time left on the clock at the moment, but is there any hope in you, or is it just like, is this just a consolation?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you want to believe because you have to believe. At that point, if you're not hoping there's going to be another goal, then what's the point really? We watch football because we're dreamers and we enjoy the entertainment of it. And as a City fan, I know my club's very dramatic. It was an emotional club, and that equaliser, you're tempted to think, oh, is it false hope? But at that point you think, well, yeah, come on, we can do this. And like you'd seen so many twists at that point that another one doesn't surprise you. And Dzeko, I think when you look at what completed that comeback, we'll get to it. I'm sure we'll obviously get to it very soon. But you look at the characters on the pitch for Manchester City, and I think that's what pushed City there. You look at Joe Hart, you look at Vincent Kompany, Yaya Toure, Edin Džeko, a man of immense quality.
So underrated.
Hugely, one of the best strikers of modern football history. Like the amount of goals he scored. But then you have people like Aguero and Balotelli. Obviously his career didn't live to promise, but he's a winner in general. Like City had so many great characters on the pitch, David Silva, that it wasn't probably a surprise that we got the equaliser, because there was a relentlessness from those who had the desire, and Zabaleta, and the drive to push City forward that, in hindsight it's easy to say, but those players wanted it. They really, really wanted it, and that's such a trite thing to say, but it's true. And when you have enough great players and enough great, leaders on the pitch, you force an equaliser through sheer bloody mindedness. And like Dzeko, he's loved. He's absolutely loved among City fans. His song is still sang, to this day on the terraces. But him getting that equaliser, it doesn't surprise me, because he is a player of immense quality and immense belief as well. And of course, it led to the next moment.
Yeah, I remember saying City need 2 in added time. I think something along those lines.
You did. I remember watching it for about an hour ago.
But I did think it was possible. Only because you're right. We are dreamers. We are romantics, and that sustains us all through the hard-nosed journalism of it all, and the professionalism of it, the identification, the information stuff that we all have to give in professional ways. But we do it from our hearts as well as our heads, and it just struck me that it could happen before it actually started to happen. And if Dzeko scored the winner, there's not of O's on the end of that name as well. I think it would be a different tattoo on people up and down. And of course, Balotelli would have helped as well. So they were well equipped. Even Toure, Silva, we would have been Zabaleta. We'd probably
come to think about it, United, we didn't have too many. Welbeck, I don't think so.
It was a good job Joe Hart didn't come up for the corner. That's all I can say.
Speaking of Joe Hart, your producer friend, that shot of Joe Hart celebrating at the end, by the way.
That's unbelievable. We'll get to him, because Tony Mills he did an amazing job in it. But just going back to before the corner was taken, thinking, and then certainly it was on then, and of course it was coming to an end. We had these split screens, so I was getting a bit of info in my ear from what was happening in Sunderland. But that every now and then Tony split the screen, Tony Mills, the director, split the screen, so we could actually see what was going on. And of course he did it. You couldn't post-produce as well as he did it live. The moment where we're watching both games and then he pulls out from Let Sunderland Go and fills the screen with Balotelli going for the ball, and that took some nerve. Of course, he'll say it was luck, as I'll say it was luck that I managed to come up with the right kind of phrase, because you don't plan for these things, you're judged on your instincts. And but Tony, he read the room, so to speak, absolutely perfectly, and he should be mentioned in dispatches. Every time I'm asked about it, I mention him, because he deserves it.
He teed it up brilliantly.
It's pictures, it's television. It's not radio, and although radio, of course, I'm sure did a splendid job on it, but he was the key to it being played over and over again, not the words. Pictures.
I think you two work in brilliant tandem there, to give you some credit here, because yes, it is fantastic, the timing of him pulling up the scenes at United, but you as well too, reenacting alongside it, but then also the scene happening and then the goal happening seconds later. As you said, it is instincts, but you are so instinctive in that moment that it just flows so perfectly. I first met
Tony in 1973, and we're talking 2012 here. Yeah. He was a 16-year-old tape librarian, and he used to bring the videotapes out for us at London Weekend Television, and I was a rookie, ex-non-league, not very good centre-forward who'd found his way into a job in television, very reluctantly, because it meant I couldn't play on Saturdays anymore, which was a hardship for me at the time. Anyway, we got on very well from there, and I suppose... all those years in between, we worked I obviously commentated on a lot of games that Tony had directed for ITV and for Sky. So, it helps, that kind of familiarity. And the secret of football television now, is the specialists cameramen, sound men, everybody that has a job on the crew, they're there because it's football week in, week out. Before, I worked for Granada Television, was a great part of me learning the job. And you get cameraman from midweek game and say, which one's Kenny Dalglish? Because he was doing Coronation Street the day before. and I understood that. I wasn't disrespecting it.
Naturally.
But the big step, and this was a sort of culmination of it, the way Tony worked that day, was going into the sports channels where you could give people a living doing sport all the time. So the people who wanted to do it, there were a lot of people who, very good directors, who didn't want to do it and went off and continued doing soap operas and stuff like that. So that was part of it as well. That makes it so much in sync. It was a great team effort, and I'm really, really proud to have had a tiny role in that team, I promise you.
Tiny is humble. I'm going to tell you guys from my perspective here, right? A lot of people think I'm a very pessimistic Man United fan, and I always tell them you haven't met my father. And on this day, before the game, during the game, he was downright certain that Man United had no chance in this. For him, we had blown it, and he was genuinely watching the United game almost angry, even that we were winning. He was angry. He's like, where was this the last few weeks? I think around 80 or so minutes, he started to gain a little bit of hope. I think he started to believe a little bit. It took him that long, City losing that long. The minute the Dzeko goal went in, we didn't know Aguero was going to happen yet. He turned to me, he said, it's over. He said, it's over. And I'll never forget that Aguero goal going in, the build-up, the Balotelli turn. We were both stood up, and I watched my dad fall to his knees as the Aguero goal went in. It's an image that will never leave my mind. My father, at this point, is maybe 40-something, fell to his knees as another man scored a goal. And to this day, it is the lowest moment of my life. But Stephen, I'm sure the highest high that you probably have ever experienced.
So I was watching with my dad. So that was the season typically. I stopped going as regularly because I was focusing on my music and all that kind of stuff at the time. And I couldn't get a ticket for the end. Yeah. But I watched that with my dad, and the adverse, effect for me. I leapt into my dad's arms and probably embraced him for many minutes. It was a beautiful moment when that goal goes in. And I think, I'll be honest with you, I think the joy of it, of course, watching City win the league, a lot of it, the Schadenfreude massively plays a part of it. Of course it does. Like watching Ferguson at the end on the pitch with the United players, I'm going to be honest with you, as where I came from as a City fan, an awful lot of hatred in there. Absolutely, because my life, people will go, oh, Ferguson made you cry as a kid. Yeah, he did. He absolutely did. But at least I could turn around and say, well, I cried as a child. You're crying as an adult now. So it's a little bit easier, But the thing is for me, is at that moment, the story was sort of complete, And all those years as a football fan, watching it, wishing, dreaming of days like this came to fruition. And it was a beautiful, cathartic moment. And I think a lot of people say about the Aguero moment, it's like, oh, you couldn't write it. But I think the beauty of that moment is that you could write it. Because if you sat down a bunch of Hollywood writers, they would write that moment. They would write that history. Yeah. The most perfect story you could possibly imagine. And I think the beauty of that is it's so romantic and it's so chaotic that it feels unpredictable. But I love it when live.
Just to cut across you, Stephen, the Hollywood writers would have QPR being relegated to have the extremes.
Probably
of the emotion.
True, yeah. But it was so dramatic that I think I wouldn't have wanted City to win it any other way, because I think. I'm sort of firm believer like life is just sort of for living and enjoying the things that you want to do, and football has this incredible ability to make us all feel like silly little kids again, and I love that, and I'd never change that. And we're all grown men here, and we go watch these footballers, millionaire footballers or whatever level, and they're kicking a ball around and they just change your mood, they change your feeling, and it has this wonderful ability to be like a time stamp of a certain period of your life, and where you are, what you're doing and how you felt. And football is beautiful that way, because it takes you on this journey. I don't think there's many things in life that can put you through the ringer emotionally more than a game of football in 90 minutes. And I think I love that, because as a person who just wants to live and feel and be with people, I love doing things I enjoy. Football has this incredible ability to just open you up and just rip your soul out, but then fill it back in with more seconds later. And watching that game with my dad, and I was devastated not to be there, but thankfully I've seen in person loads of wonderful triumphs since then. But I watched it with my dad and had a quiet moment with him, and thanked him for taking, I'm getting emotional thinking about it, thanked him for taking to my first game, as a kid, and And it's just football, but it's something that you do, with your dad or your mates, and you go and watch. It's something that you'll always have together and share. And that moment, and you watch the fans celebrating, you can sense that they're looking around at their friends. They're not enjoying it for themselves. They're enjoying it for what it means for the people that they love and all the people around them. And it is just a football game. But it's also that shared interest and that moment. And that Aguero moment for me was 20 years of living in Manchester, having United fans annoying me. And it was fun because he was throwing it back in their faces. But it was emotional because I've always dreamt of that as a child and seeing my dreams come true. And it was exhilarating because it was beautifully chaotic. And it was just everything. And all these heroes that I'd fallen in love with had given me that moment of celebration. And I think people who don't understand football, I don't think we love football because it's a game. I think we love football because what it does to us emotionally, and it changes your mood so vividly. And that to me it's like the peak version of that. In football, those moments are so rare. So when they happen, they just take over your whole personality in your life. And that Aguero moment to me is something truly special. It's not my son's being born, but in terms of it's not far off emotionally. In fact, your son's being born is quite stressful. But that is incredibly stressful, but so entertaining and so wonderful. And so the Aguero moment is rightfully, and obviously Martin's commentary, perfect, but it rightfully soundtracks what makes football so special. I think the epitome, the essence of football is captured in that moment. And I think it doesn't matter who you support. I still get goosebumps now thinking about it. It's a wonderful moment.
Duality of man here, by the way. I think we're on completely different. Is this the crowning moment? Not the crowning moment. I don't want to say that. But is this like the most climatic moment of your career? When you think of all the goals you have commentated, was that almost like you felt you reached the pinnacle?
I hope not, because I've been doing it for many years since. I was pleased that I was there. It was a truly, people put it with the England's fourth goal to win the World Cup with Kenneth Wolstenholme's wonderful commentary. Brian Moore, who was a great help to me as a young commentator in his Anfield moment in 1989. And I feel very honoured to be bracketed with that kind of level. But in truth, I was doing my job, and my job is to love football, but with a way that makes it understandable, I suppose. And Stephen talked a lot about emotion. It's very important to me to have the emotion. I always talk about the smell of the fixture, before the game, the smell of the fixture was, well, City are going to win the league for the first time since 1968, and I've got to be ready for that, the scenes at the end and whatever. So never envisaging. I mean, the one question that I have been asked a few times is, when did you write down what you were going to say when Aguero scored? I mean, can you imagine? I'd have been locked away for madness if I'd been envisaging a scenario like that. It's all reactive. It's all off the cuff, and it was what I felt. I was lucky enough to spend some time with Sergio well after, in his last season, when City fixed up that we could have an interview together, which Sky kindly arranged. And I said, one thing I did say to him is that I knew you'd score before you knew, because I knew what a great player you are. My vantage point, once you took the touch, I was ready. If anything, I got some air in my lungs for what followed. He was really humble about it, and that's what I feel about it. He created the moment. It's his moment. It's Manchester City's moment, and to be associated with it is an honour. But it's, if they said, I don't care what the commentator said, it's that we saw the game and this is what happened, I would understand that totally. But it was okay. That's why I hope it fitted the bill, because that's all you. Honestly, please don't think this is false modesty, because all commentators go to games hoping that we get the right feeling at the right time. Of course, the right players. And a Premier League manager the following season said to me, in the July of 2012, when I went to see his team play, because I hadn't seen them, they got a promoted team, and he said to me, last week I just heard, I wasn't aware of what had happened with the guy. I knew the story, but I hadn't heard the commentary. And I said, no, look, it's Sergio. It's great for him, great for City. You know, the way it panned out, no disrespect to Man United. And he said, and I can't use the words in your podcast, although I'd like to. He said, at least you didn't mess it up. But he didn't use the word mess. And I think that's my take on it. That it was in keeping with what the moment wanted, and if everybody else feels that, then yeah, I'm proud of that. Yeah.
Are we in agreement that this is, if not the greatest Premier League moment in the history of the league's inception, maybe the crowning moment, or the moment that best encapsulates Premier League football?
I mean, for me, it is, obviously. I mean, I'm incredibly biased, but I think the story, the quality, the goal, the quality of the player as well. I mean, Aguero being Aguero and one of the greatest goal scorers, I think it leads into it. Of course, the brilliance of the commentary, not just saying it because you sat it, because it's true. You know, I think everything about it, the timing, and I think it's an iconic moment that it's impossibly hard to top, because it meant so much. It was so incredibly dramatic that, you know, there'll be dramatic moments afterwards, but I think they're always going to be judged against the Aguero moment because of how chaotic it was, because it was Man United, obviously Premier League giants, because what City have become. I think the more you step away from it, the more the story becomes more colourful. And I think it's a scene moment which makes it so brilliant. And yeah, to me, it is the most iconic moment in Premier League history. I can't say it's the most important or the best or whatever, but in terms of sheer, you know, memorability, I think it has to be, personally.
I think it's also part of the time where there were only a certain number of games on television. I think it's more difficult now, and I do support the fact that almost, you know, it's a high percentage of this season, going to be an even higher percentage, I think, in seasons to come with the new deal. So some of the games get lost in the fact that there's so much food on the table, you don't know what to eat, you know. And so I think that it is a symbol of that era, which has only recently changed, but it's certainly changed. And before the Premier League started, I did what they called the World Game quite regularly, which was a 3:00 kickoff that goes around Scandinavia and all the Far East and things like that, but never live in England. But the great selling point, and this is going through troublesome times for English football because of hooliganism, etc., was with English football, you always get first whistle to last. And I've felt that way before the Premier League, when I started commentating, and probably even when I was watching it as a kid. And this sums up first whistle to last, really. And of course, yeah, to have somebody had the prize, it was snatched from them. Not only somebody had the prize, your next door neighbour had the prize, and they had the house full of prizes, and you took this one away from them and put it in your house. I think that's probably the thing that just stokes it above anything else. So, yeah, I think so.
I think, to be honest, Alex Ferguson deserved that moment too. I think he's an incredible manager, but a brilliant manager, but used to it being going his own way. And I think there's something satisfying watching great people knock down a peg or two every now and then. And of course, it's Schadenfreude as a football fan, but that's what makes it so much fun to me.
And now City want to get knocked. People want City to get knocked.
Absolutely,
you understand that?
Of course, I do. And look, I wouldn't. Yeah. One thing I always say about this is I genuinely believe that I wish every fan got to go through that. I really do believe that, because I think it's sort of the peak experience as a football fan. It's incredible, and I wouldn't begrudge any fan.
It was your version of our Solskjaer.
Yeah, right? Absolutely.
That was our Solskjaer moment in '99.
But fundamentally, as much as we all round each other's fans up, they're all just people. There's a billion decent fans in every fan base, you know. So I wish every fan base go through that, but at the same time, they also deserve to go through that at the same time, the other way around, because it humbles you.
How many questions do we have left, man? Seriously. I guess for both of you as well too. When you look at this era of Manchester City under their takeover period, right, from 2008 onwards, is this the moment that made Manchester City that we know today? Or do you look at maybe the Yaya Toure goal in the FA Cup? Or do you maybe look at a different moment in particular? Or is this the day that Man City put themselves on the map in England and even in the world?
I'll give Stephen more time on this, but just to say, I think it absolutely is, because of what we've just said earlier, that had it gone the other way, obviously it wouldn't have something might have happened since then. Yeah. But this was such a dramatic way to do it, even though they were beating a team that were fighting for their Premier League survival, and therefore they should be beating them. You know, the context of the game, the way the story unfolded, it just gave, I think it was a lift-off. And although next year's City lost the cup final and United won the league, the seeds have been sown. yours.
Yeah, I think
it's
you're
all
probably
yours.
no. I think you're probably right. I mean, there's no guarantee at that point. I mean, what the individual that probably sealed the dominance is, I do believe, is Pep Guardiola. But I don't think we get to that stage without that moment anyway. Because Mancini the season after, he sort of unravelled a little bit, if I'm being honest, which led to Pellegrini coming in. Of course, he won the league as well. But I doubt whether if we'd got that close and fallen short, if we'd picked ourselves up again and carried on. And at that point, you've got a lot of great players there. Aguero, David Silva, Yaya Toure, Vincent Kompany. They might have stayed around, but there's a decent chance one or two of them might have left. And at that point, you're not giving the same collection of players to Pep Guardiola, who goes on to build the most incredible team based off the brilliance of Kompany and David Silva and Aguero. Does Kevin De Bruyne even join in 2015 if you haven't won the league a couple of times, which is, there's so many knock-on effects from that I think, like that moment absolutely is, is formative. Look, it wasn't the first time we won the league, but it was the first time post-takeover, and the first is the most important, for that new generation. And I do believe everything we've achieved right there is off the back of that. It has to be, because as a club, we don't win the league at any 13-14 under Pellegrini. If we hadn't won that, I was certain, because there's not expectance, but there's an understanding of how you do it. Yeah. So yeah, of course it is. It's the most. Maybe the playoff final is the most important thing for me as a City fan, because without that we're probably languishing down in the lower tiers of football still. We've seen it tap into big clubs, look at Portsmouth and so on, and look at Sheffield Wednesday. I've been back in the Premier League for so long. That could have easily been Manchester City, and we could have easily been down there. But in terms of changing the direction of the club, but it's the Aguero moment. It's 93. Literally, there is 93-20. You can only ask. There's only one collection, one sort of demographic of people in the world. If you said the number is 93-22, that would understand. Maybe United fans, but everyone else, it's Manchester City fans. It's four numbers there that mean so much to us, because that changed the course of our lives as football fans. And I think it changed the direction of the club.
I think Sir Alex leaves Man United that season as well too, if Man United win the league in 11-12.
Probably.
I think he stayed another year longer just to get one back over City.
So if anything, Van Persie owes City an awful lot, because that wouldn't happen otherwise, would it?
Yeah. Final question, Martin. In part of your commentary, you say, "I swear you'll never see anything like this ever again." Is that just a heat of the moment line, or do you honestly believe we will never see a moment as climatic as that in Premier League history?
Well, I have to say that when Gundogan came to the rescue for
it was pretty close, huh?
It was very close, and I was doing that game as well, and I did start to just fuzz up my perspective a little bit, but it didn't actually happen. And Steve and I were talking about it outside. The timings of it, it didn't exactly replicate it. So no, I meant it at the time, and I stand by it all these years later. We're still talking about it. Of course, there's nothing that football is such an amazing dynamic that it could happen again, but I don't believe it will, and I'm absolutely sure that I won't be around to see it. So I think when my time is up, I will be able to carry that into my legacy, I suppose, because it won't have happened then. I'd be surprised if it did, but never say never, I suppose. But I did say never. So there you go.
For me, it can't. It's physically impossible to happen again, because it's not just the moments, it's the stories. It's the fact that United banner had said 34 years that we had to rip it down. It's the fact that we recorded Noisy Neighbours. It's the fact that we've been picked on by United for so long. It's the fact that United were in front and then we were behind. It's everything that leads into it, and we can't have that moment again, because we've had too much success since then. It'd have to be an awful long time and a whole new generation of people who've been crushed on. They'd have to. City fans of a young age would have to go through 25 years of nothing, like I did until that moment, and to experience it again. I don't think that's going to happen. The only way you could have a similar moment, it was a different set of teams with a different set of circumstances, because there's too much history that leads into that moment.
Well, you look at Wrexham and you think, oh well, goodness me, suppose Wrexham now get into the Premier League and have all their Hollywood backing. Maybe they can create a Hollywood story of their own.
Who's the rival there? That's the thing. It's the rivalry. It's the intercity rivalry that makes it so beautiful. But that's, I think, what makes the moment so memorable, because you just know at the core, as a football fan, that is genuinely a one-off moment, because it can't be replicated.
The final kick of the final day of the season.
It's not just the game.
Season,
it's ridiculous.
It's everything that bleeds into that moment that made it so special. And I think the reason the fans were so loud is because of that 30 years of frustration. And without that, and you can't force that for what it's worth.
Well, one final story about the history of City is I had planned before the game. A guy called Paul Doherty was my producer at Granada and did wonderful things in terms of developing my career when I worked for Granada in the early 1980s, and was he was the Alec Ferguson of television producers. His dad, who was called Peter Doherty, won the league as a Manchester City player in 1937, and Paul had arranged, and I was hoping it would be a big day for him and his family. He was bringing his medal to the game. So when we'd done our bit and the presentation and everything, and when I saw Richard Scudamore, I mentioned earlier, I was on the way down to see Paul and see this tiny little medal of the history of Manchester City, so that Manchester City hadn't come from nowhere. Before I left the ground, the last thing I saw in the stadium really was a 1937 winners' medal of the league, having seen all the presentations and what had been gone on today. So it was I love the history. I know you do as well, and I know you do. And then you've coming at a very different angle, but that kind of connection, it was just a special part of what was a very special day for all of us on Sky Sports, and I suppose me in particular here.
And you mentioned the Gundogan moment, and we were talking about how similar it was. I was working with City in the stadium at that point, and the feeling when it went to all was, oh, it's happening again. But it isn't the same moment. It wasn't Man United they were up against. It was a very different moment. But it was I think what adds further sort of pathos to that moment is that we were reminded of that feeling of how special it was. And the fact that, if anything, that 93-20 Aguero moment elevated the Gundogan feeling, because you have all those feelings come rushing back to you. So it's sort of this mythical story that will live on and inspire other tales, essentially. I don't think the Gundogan moment happens without the Aguero moment. I think all these things, they shape the identity of the club hugely.
Yeah.
So
I think you look at City nowadays as well too. They have almost adopted Man United's moniker of, well, we had Fergie time. Now it almost feels like Pep time. City now feel like the club in England that when it is approaching the final seconds of a game, you can never kind of count them out. And that probably stems from that Aguero goal.
It does. I mean, and the playoff, Gota and Dikov scoring late on in 1999. But that is, we fight till the end, is one of our, the catchphrases as City fans and our mottos. And yeah, I think that it changes the club. It shapes the club. Like one moment, one goal, one iconic. The imagery as well plays into it. Of course, it does. I mean, I said we're all dreamers and we're storytellers, and like that, your commentary, the production, the visuals, and cutting to Ferguson, the whole thing, it makes it so much more memorable. So, and I think it changes the direction of the club, so it just can't be topped. It's just not possible.
When it's late, it's invariably great, and this was the greatest.
What a way to end it off. This has been a bit of therapy for me. I feel like I've just lived 20 years of history right now. I'm incredibly honored that I could go on this journey with Martin Tyler. Thank you so much for being here with us. Stephen, I'm a little less honored to be here with you, honestly, because I feel like you've helped me relive my biggest nightmares. But
a free trauma session for you, mate.
Yeah, honestly. Yeah. But this has been a joy nonetheless, and it's own special way.
It's been a real pleasure for me to meet both of you, and yeah, I do get asked a fair bit about it, but I never really get tired of reliving it, and you've taken us back right to the meat of it as well, which not everybody does. So it made me think a bit, and yeah, a few extra special memories.
I'm glad I could restore that feeling. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on this journey. This has been Rematch. Myself, Lies, Martin Tyler, and Stephen. I hope to see you guys very, very soon. Like, share, subscribe. We'll see you very, very soon.